So in this course, we have already discussed the prosecution side, and we've discussed the defense side, and today we are going to discuss judges. So there's different ways that judges come about being a judge. There's 5 different methods that we look at. There's a partisan election and nonpartisan elections, gubernatorial appointments, legislative appointments, and merit selections. So first, partisan and nonpartisan elections. Partisan elections mean that a judge's name goes on a ballot, and they run on a party ticket where either they are a Democrat, a Republican, or they may be an independent. And then the public votes for their choice by secret ballot. In nonpartisan elections, which is what North Carolina does, the candidates do not run affiliated with any party. So on your ballot, you would have the judge's name, but you would not have what party that they were affiliated with. Some of the problems with elections is the most popular are not necessarily the best candidates will fill the positions. So think about back, you guys probably haven't been out of high school that long, and some of you still are in high school, but think about how like the Student Government Association works and probably your homecoming court. It's a popularity contest. Those that are most popular win, not necessarily based on anything else. So the same way with judges, it could put a person in the position that they're just widely known and their name is widely recognized, and that's how they fill that seat. Sometimes there's private financing behind a judicial candidate, and what that means is a person contributes to their campaign to run, and then you wonder if there are some type of promises that are made behind the scenes saying, if you help get me elected, I will do da-da-da for you once I fill that seat. Now, we hope that that doesn't happen in our process, but it is a thing to be concerned with. So then the next one that we look at is gubernatorial appointments. And there's 3 primary ways that states use these appointment methods in the selection of judges. And they are either to choose a judge for an initial term, to select a judge to fill an interim or a midterm vacancy, or to retain a judge to serve an additional term. And the governors will do these. So the governor might take what the state bar says and go with names from there, or he might not. He might pick someone who will work with his agenda or her agenda. Next, you've got legislative election of judges. So the legislative method is a process of judicial selection by which state legislators, rather than the governor or the general public, they choose a judge to serve on the state appellate and general jurisdiction courts. There's only 2 states that use this method, and that is South Carolina and Virginia. Some of the problems with appointment is some research shows that judicial outcomes do differ between judges who are elected and judges who are appointed. Sometimes judges, because of their powerful positions, may influence trial outcomes or dismiss cases or find innocent defendants guilty or vice versa. And they also regulate the harshness in which offenders are sentenced. So then you have the merit selection. And this is when a judge is nominated by a committee, and then that committee selection goes to the governor, and the governor makes the selection from that list for a given period. And when the term expires, the voters in that district are asked to vote on that person with either yes or no, whether or not they should serve another term. Now, one example of that is the Missouri Plan. And the Missouri Plan is a committee that's made up of lawyers who are appointed by the governor, and then they're chaired by a judge. They put up a list of qualified candidates for each judicial vacancy, and then the governor chooses one from that list. So which section does do judges prefer? Most of those judges that have been evaluated say that they prefer the merit system because it tends to keep the politics out of the courtroom. So then we look at the federal judicial selections. So the President of the United States makes appointments to the federal bench, and then those nominations must pass Senate confirmation. So that means the Senate has to vote on them, and they typically question them and come through their voting history. You read a few weeks ago how when Justice Antonin Scalia passed away in his sleep in 2016, the nomination confirmations for his replacement were stalled by the legislators because they wanted to block President Obama from nominating a justice to the Supreme Court during an election year when he was on his way out of office, and they were successful with that. So Supreme Court appointments, once someone is appointed to the Supreme Court, they are there for a lifetime. Typically, they reflect the president's vested interest, which is why the legislators and General Assembly was fighting so hard to not go through confirmation hearings when President Obama was trying to replace Justice Scalia, because they didn't want him to, they argued that he was going to put another liberal-based judge on the bench, and then that would sway the court over to the liberal agenda. So you make it what it is, but that was the argument. The forms of judicial misconduct, most judicial misconduct relates to their performance. However, back in 2017, and you guys can research this, there was a North Carolina Superior Court judge from Wayne County, and his name was Arnold Jones. He was sentenced to 2 years probation, a $5,000 fine, and 100 hours of community service after offering a federal agent 2 cases of Bud Light and $100 to retrieve his wife's text messages without a warrant. He knew he needed that warrant, and he approached a federal agent anyway. Needless to say, he's not a judge anymore, and now he's doing community service. There's prejudice in evidentiary rulings, meaning the judge might covertly side with either the defense or the prosecution, but that's pretty hard to prove. So most judges can argue their way out of it and say that they were not being biased. Then there's deliberately aggravating or mitigating sentences. So the judges can deliberately increase or decrease the severity of the sentence. Although in North Carolina, they do have structured sentencing where they have to follow the guidelines, and judges can't use factors such as their sex, their race, the ethnicity, or the religious affiliation of the defendant to sentence them. Also, accepting bribes. So judges can't accept bribes. On your PowerPoint, you see in 2011, a Pennsylvania judge was convicted for taking bribes from a builder of a juvenile detention center in exchange for sentencing juveniles to detention, even though they were in most cases first-time offenders who had committed minor offenses. So they likely would have typically been diverted out of the court system and not incarcerated, but the judge was taking bribes. So some of the criticisms of judges are that they don't have competence and they're not experienced, or that they make harmful and irreversible errors. There's court delays and clogged calendars, but I can't say that that would trace back to judges as much as it does just the due process nature of our criminal justice system requires the prosecution to take certain steps, and the wheels of justice are not fast moving. So that finishes up our Chapter 5 lecture. So you now can move on to your homework assignments.